Hello.
Yeah, hello. We don't have a moderator, so we're kind of ungovernable. Yeah, so I guess I was going to sort of be a quasi-moderator a little bit, just to start us, around this term of Neocypherpunk. And for a long time, people would attribute the term Neocypherpunk to me. So they would say that I was the creator of Neocypherpunk as a term, but actually it's you. So I was wondering whether you could tell us a little bit about that, the origins of the term Neocypherpunk.
Yeah, so I can explain, so as far as we know, that I had the earliest usage of the term Neocypherpunk, and I can explain a bit of history, context there. But actually, to give you a bit of credit, just to go back in time, in about 2014, Paul gave me a copy of a book called Cypherpunks by Julian Assange. Cypherpunk and the Freedom of the Internet, I think it's called, which is a great book, and I highly recommend it. It's basically a long interview with Assange, but at the beginning of the book, it starts off with a manifesto. And it's kind of an address from Assange to the world, and he's speaking in a tone which is there's a sense of urgency. And he's basically saying, our world is hurtling headlong into this massive crisis of global totalitarian surveillance, and the only path forward, a path of freedom is to encrypt and build unstoppable peer-to-peer anonymous systems. And when I read this in 2014 or something, it left a powerful impression on me, and it was one of the factors that got me into crypto. But then going into crypto and as I kind of started going to conferences in and around 2016 era, there was a massive disconnect, kind of a cognitive dissonance between the ideals of the cypherpunks and the reality of the crypto industry that was what was going on at events. So kind of early on, started to feel like there was a malaise, something a little bit inside of crypto that was crypto was adrift. It had become de-anchored from its fundamental mission, and it's just kind of lost and floating around. So at the beginning, DarkFi was kind of conceived as a neo-cypherpunk project insofar it was a revival of the original cypherpunk principles that brought me and many others into the crypto space. But the term that I kind of used, I switched between using the term lunarpunk, which some of you may have heard. Neo-cypherpunk was another word that I used for the same thing. And basically, all these terms mean is, to me at least at the time, was a revival of the original principles that invigorate crypto, and kind of recentering of crypto back to its original proposition, which was radical, revolutionary, and it involved using decentralized, unstoppable, peer-to-peer, and strongly anonymous technologies to create a shift in the logic of violence that basically redistributes power away from the state and towards smaller actors. And through this process of revival, right, you're not simply reflecting and becoming nostalgic about the first cypherpunk movement. You're also recreating cypherpunk for the modern age, right? So it's simultaneously this synthesis of cypherpunk with the kind of new culture of crypto. So what is the new culture of crypto? I would say the orientation is a little bit less kind of individualist. There was more of an emphasis on squads, squad wealth, stuff like DAOs, networks, and this sentiment that in order to have real impact, we need to work together and not just be kind of individual nodes on our own little missions, but actually to build something together that's truly emancipatory potential. So there's a few shifts in this revival of cypherpunk that makes it a neo-cypherpunk or a lunarpunk, which we can talk about, but that's a little bit the context. So I don't think personally, when I hear neo-cypherpunk, I still think about it within this context. It's the broader effort to revive the original values of crypto and to reinvigorate crypto back to something meaningful because it's lost a sense of direction. There's a sense of malaise, and you really feel it now in the bear market. Anyway, I can go on, but I'll let Paul say something.
Yeah, I mean, so it really made me think that this idea of perspectives on Neocypherpunk. I started even thinking about how did I think about cypherpunk as recently as absolute essentials of Ethereum? Like, what did I call the values in the book? And the terms, like the definitions that I went with, were the values of decentralization. So power should be distributed as widely as possible. Permissionlessness, no permission required to use the protocol. Censorship resistance, all transactions are equal in the eyes of the protocol, I guess. And then credible neutrality, because it was an Ethereum book, so we need to have a Vitalik value in there. And what I think is important about this is that when, let's say in the recent history, I guess what I'm trying to get at is that in the reason why Neocypherpunk has become important again is because there was an event, essentially in Ethereum culture, where we saw something like a populist revolt against the Ethereum Foundation. And the nature of this populist revolt was, we want pragmatists who wanted to focus on eat the asset and institutional focus, and that we should be less concerned about the dreaming about cypherpunk and talking about ideology, that actually this is something that's getting in the way of Ethereum succeeding. And then there's an installation of Thomas as the pragmatist representation, and then we get Xiaowei as representing the cypherpunk side of the OG cypherpunk perspective. Now, the reason why this is important is because we have seen in recent times that the Ethereum Foundation has decided to, I guess, codify the values of Ethereum along these cypherpunk lines in a very hardcore way. And one story that I think is a little bit untold about this is the origin, like where does crops come from, right? So where exactly did this originate, this terminology? And it really is a story of these various different documents. So all the way back in when Vitalik wrote Make Ethereum Cypherpunk Again. So this is a blog post that Vitalik writes in response to Tornado Cash. So Tornado Cash is effectively the first moment really in Ethereum culture where the presumption that our values are being inscribed are really challenged, because of course what's happening is there are censoring on the layer 1 blockchain itself. So we get this blog post which reintroduces cypherpunk. There is the question, of course, was Ethereum ever cypherpunk, which is a different question. And then after that, there's a subterranean lineage of documentation. So P. Versacio's Ethereum Cypherpunk Manifesto, which is really underappreciated, and I encourage people to check it out. It actually has crops in there, so censorship resistance, privacy and security. It hasn't got open source. That's one of the pillars that's sort of buried in the text. And then after that, with Xiaowei, we get DeFi Punk, which now stresses that if the Ethereum Foundation is going to support you, then it's going to be a case that we only support you on the basis of your crops affiliation, let's say. And then that leads us to the famous or infamous Ethereum Foundation mandate document, which I will just state clearly that I disagree with the pledge on principle. I think that was an unnecessary cultural schism. There's no need to be pledging to documents like this. However, it is a very, very useful document in terms of it's a rare, deep analysis, granular analysis of what these values are. We don't have many documents of that caliber out there. Now, that goes back to this story. It's just something you mentioned around like telling our own story. So Neocypherpunk, I think, is useful because as a term, if we want to talk about, say, censorship resistance, we can begin by telling people about cypherpunk, and then you go all the way back to the 1980s. So now we're talking about DigiCash, and then maybe we're going to talk about PGP, and then we're going to go through the crypto wars. And then we get to Satoshi, and we get to his influence, or him being influenced by the mailing list. And then we have to tell the story of libertarianism meets open source. That gets you a new, fresh culture. And then by the time you get to Ethereum, your audience that you're trying to teach about cypherpunk has not really learned about the blockchain implementation of cypherpunk that we ourselves actually have. We have our own tradition, we have our own culture. We do not need to be going that deep into history to be talking about cypherpunk. We should begin the story with, say, Bitcoin, and with Ethereum, you should begin talking about the values as they are actually discussed, and in the realpolitik context that these values are changing. So, for example, censorship resistance traditionally just meant, transactions can't be censored. You read the Ethereum Foundation mandate, it focuses on downstream applications, right, interfering with downstream applications. It also talks about durable, non-competitive, like being in a position of durable, it's a very tricky phrase, durable, non-competitive scenarios. So for example, in the case of the middleware services around proof of stake, so relayers and builders and solvers, etc., even if they are not necessarily censoring, although they were censoring for quite a while before sanctions got lifted on Tornado Cash, just by being in that position, you are like latently censoring, which is something, a very powerful and interesting idea. It's like you're virtually or latently or potentially censoring, and that itself is considered a form of censorship resistance, which is unacceptable according to the CROPS documentation. The other big one would be and here's where I'd be a little bit critical, where is decentralization? To me, decentralization is a meta principle, is not something that is a means to an end. That comes from Picab Versatio, this language that you'll hear on Twitter. More and more you'll hear people say that decentralization is a means toward censorship resistance, etc. And I very much disagree with that. I think that that's a diminishing status of what I would consider our most important value. But that would be my general take.
So something I want to kind of tease out here a little bit more is like, basically, I really think when I started talking about Neocypherpunk and lunarpunk back in like 2020, when I started talking about this, it was very much a reaction to the lack of discussion around privacy and anonymity inside of crypto. Because all the other values were being talked about nonstop. Like everyone was talking about decentralization, censorship resistance, permissionlessness, like there was lip service being paid to this. Privacy, anonymity sometimes get a mention, but there was like literally zero work being done on that aside from like in Zcash and Monero. And then like literally, I remember I went to an Ethereum conference in New York, and there was a man, he gave a speech talking about how you could tokenize your biometrics, and you could use you could wave at your car and it would unlock because of some like NFT on the blockchain or something like this, and people were cheering this guy on, and I was like, what is this? This was like kind of just prior to DeFi, but it was like everyone was fetishizing this idea that Ethereum was like an on-chain data kind of explosion that would lead to all these like interesting, smart utilizations of data. And even the DeFi angle was all emphasis on transparency and like, oh, you can now, there's going to be no corruption anymore because all the finance is 100% on-chain. And, you can see everything. And that was very much the rhetoric, and so that was partially one of the things that I was reacting strongly to in the lunarpunk manifesto, because it basically describes all that kind of thinking as solarpunk, right? And it says like this solarpunk imaginary, it's like it's obsessed with transparency, but it's fundamentally fragile, because as soon as you become a real threat, it's trivial to basically persecute the participants within those networks. And this is like the weakness of Ethereum, essentially. So that was the time. And now I do see Ethereum has kind of started to pick up the conversation about privacy and anonymity, which is good. And I really hope they do pull it off. I will say, though, I just want to bring up a kind of interesting historical point. Which is like, there's this weird, strange paradox in history where, so in Ireland, the revolution which happened in the 20th century was spurred on, like prior to the political revolution, there was a cultural revolution called the Gaelic Revival. And this was all about like reviving the myths, the founding myths of Ireland, and like this kind of like romantic nostalgia for like the imagined Celtic past. And it was simultaneously historical, thinking back what things were like before, but it was also this synthesis of like creating something new, like this new aesthetic based off of an imagined past. And a big part of this Gaelic revival was the language revival. So everyone was trying to return to like Gaelic and wanting to restore the Irish language as the primary language spoken in Ireland. But there's an interesting kind of paradox in history, which is the political revolution that preceded this, that implemented this cultural revolution. They did win like the sovereignty of Ireland, You know, like they did a successful revolution, but they never achieved the language goal. Like they never got Irish spoken as the main language. So there was, and neither did they implement a Gaelic revival. Like culturally, Ireland remained the same as it was under British colonization. So it was like they had this vision of what they were doing, but the reality of it was different to the reality of what they were doing. There was like a disconnect between the dream of their work and the reality that they ended up doing. So it's a weird paradox because the revival, the revolution, and the loss of the language happened at the same historical moment. So it's like they were simultaneously talking excitedly about like how they're going to bring back Irish at the same exact moment. Irish was like basically falling into almost near extinction. So it's like this weird thing. Anyway, I wonder like if we're not at risk, at least, I mean, with DarkFi, we've made a concerted effort to like, you know, like essentially walk the talk. Like, you know, we have from the beginning built everything to be like strongly anonymous. You know, it's not just a value, like it's actually software. It's like hardcore, uncompromising anonymity at like every level of the stack. But Ethereum, I feel like it's in this weird situation where it's not anonymous. It's not. There are no privacy protecting features. I know they want to make them, but it's like it feels like the ETH Foundation is retreating, and it's now just purely representing values. And I do wonder if it's possible that there's this like psychological rift, like this disconnect between the dream of this Neocypherpunk vision and the reality of what Ethereum actually is today, which, you know, it isn't this Neocypherpunk thing. I mean, maybe it is to some degree, right? But it's definitely not anonymous or privacy preserving.
Yeah, that's unexpected Irish detour, which obviously I'm quite happy with. Is Ethereum Ireland? It's an interesting philosophical discussion. The privacy aspect, I think that is important to stress about Ethereum, that like privacy has not been considered an important central value of Ethereum. I mean, there's always been people defending it, right? So there's always been, say, elements within Ethereum culture who are privacy oriented. In fact, Web3Privacy Now would be, has been doing like Trojan work in terms of like ensuring that it is part of the conversation. But this more or less comes from Picab Versacchio's influence, I think, as well. So he has, as well as the Ethereum Cypherpunk manifesto, he also has another manifesto which is called Ethereum, the Road to Self-Sovereignty, which is an interesting word, the sovereignty aspect, where he outlines everything that would be needed to make Ethereum completely private. So he doesn't just make the claim like, you know, privacy should be unconditional, which, you know, people, it's easy to say Ethereum should have unconditional privacy at the base layer. But he goes through all of the different elements that would need to be accomplished. And it is one of the most intimidating documents just in terms of the extensive nature of what would be involved, and then also just like the knowledge that he's displaying in terms of just the understanding the protocol. When he asked me to give a bit of feedback, the one thing I said that he was missing, he gave us the technical specifications of how this would be accomplished, and I said that's fine, but actually the real job here would be the governance and the culture. So we have this culture now, which is at least in theory, including privacy as one of its non-negotiable core values, where there actually is no barrier to, saying like, I mean, in theory, we have a roadmap, but it's not exactly clear to me that like privacy is at the forefront of, say, Ethereum's thinking when it comes to, I guess what Picab Versacchio is saying is, if Ethereum wants to be fully private, the roadmap essentially has to be a privacy roadmap, and then everything else is secondary, which I just think is a good Irish nationalist type hardline to take.
Yeah, well, I hope ETH pulls it off, because then we could have anonymous bridges to DarkFi. But let's see. I guess DarkFi is the bet that it does not.
Yeah, I guess one other aspect of this that I want to make sure, this is something that if I have one thing that I always like to say, I guess I'm always thinking of people who are growing up in the current Ethereum cultural environment, that we have managed to escape the temptation of people to turn it into a sort of like pragmatist, acultural phenomenon, and that we should keep in mind that, Ethereum is not a company, right? It's effectively a system of stakeholders. And those stakeholders, they have different imaginaries that they adhere to, so regens and degens and lunarpunks and cypherpunks. But ultimately, the glue, right, the ineliminable core of what Ethereum is those Neocypherpunk values. So if we imagine a situation where degen comes out of fashion, comes into fashion and disappears, regen does the same and so forth. But I think all of those things can change, even the pragmatist focus can change. But if Neocypherpunk or cypherpunk values disappeared from Ethereum, it would be no longer recognizably Ethereum.
All right, do you want to move? Okay, we'll move to our next section. Okay, so we've got topics.
Yeah. This came up because the dark forest theory of the internet. So Tree Body Problem, seminal science fiction novel that everyone loves or maybe knows from the TV show. And it's the origin of that term, the dark forest, right? So the dark forest meaning that any sufficiently advanced civilization, upon encountering another civilization, the intelligent thing to do is to essentially eradicate the other civilization. And then otherwise, your job is basically to hide as much as possible and like just not be found. This has its own crypto variant. So it's been used by a famous Paradigm blog post where it's extrapolated into MEV and so forth. So you're just like the average user, but the advanced civilizations are flashbots and so forth. Also, you've used this term, and in a book, Bogna Konor's book, The Dark Forest Theory of the Internet, where she essentially says the internet itself should be understood in this way, that when you are online, you should presume that there are alien intelligences, meaning algorithms, artificial intelligence, of course, and then I guess like we could add in flashbots, etc. Maybe Lazarus in our case, and that the intelligent thing to do in that situation would be to hide. And I suppose it's also worth mentioning that Bogna Konor includes your lunarpunk in her book. She mentions your use of the dark forest. So when I was reading this, I was wondering, this seems to be a tension, right, where if Neocypherpunk is supposed to be more collaborative, right, we're supposed to be working together, more mutualist, less individualistic interpretation of what cypherpunk is, but that seems to imply that we must be visible. So how does that, I guess, how can we mesh that with the other side of it, the adversarial nature? So we are also supposed to be in some way hiding through our privacy actions. So I was wondering what you think of that.
Yeah, so I will kind of answer that in a roundabout way, but I don't know how many people have actually read The Tree Body Problem or have seen the Netflix. Don't watch Netflix. If you're going to watch something, watch the Chinese version, which is really good. I really recommend it, and the books are great as well. But anyways, this concept of the dark forest is like very much related to information and kind of like many levels. There's basically two ways of understanding it. One is like surveillance, the surveillance world, like where it's like you're hiding because if you reveal yourself even slightly, it's just like you're automatically annihilated. So it's kind of like if you imagine actually it's kind of analogous to drone warfare today. And like if you're in an exposed environment where, the AI is just like monitoring your movements, and if you step outside your cover, you'll just be like instantly kind of like drone striked by this like total domination by air. So that's kind of like the dark forest, but dark forest is like applied on the cosmic scale. But the other angle, the kind of information impact of the dark forest is like the impact that has on human behavior. So people start in the books, like they're trying to do politically organizing against the aliens, right? But they can't actually act in a way that is like revealing their strategies. So they have to like basically create like tricky behaviors that like mislead the aliens in terms of what they're actually doing, and they have to basically their only place of like true kind of sovereignty is like inside their own minds, and they have this like weird double act where they know they're under surveillance, so they're like trying to use that informationally to kind of disturb the aliens' view on them.
Yeah, it sounds like the UK.
Yeah, it's very much like the modern like social media experience. It's like everyone is always aware they're being watched, so they moderate their behavior in weird ways. And it's like this weird performance of identity. So that's where Bogna Kinyor, she wrote a book, DarkFi Theories of the Internet. And I do recommend this book. It's very cool. She does something which she calls aesthetic sublimation. So that's like, instead of being like, okay, let's fight the Terminator, you know, let's fuck the system and like overthrow the surveillance and break it with encryption. Instead of having that kind of energy, she's like, no, let's just confront this, the reality of this, in a way as harshly as possible, and like see it for what it is, without running away, like without running away or trying to cope by creating like some fantasy of escape. Let's just feel this, see it for what it is. And then this sublimation that she talks about is like, then how can we like aesthetically transform the horror of that experience into some kind of practice, right? So it's like, in her case, she writes the book, like Dark Forest Theory of the Internet. But yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan, and she talks about Dark Forest in the sense that I use it. So I tend to use Dark Forest in a way that's not very fair to the book, Three Body Problem. So I see it as more as like, Dark Forest is like it's the rewilded internet, right? It's like anonymous enclaves where you have like total freedom of thought and conversation and freedom of action, and like everything that flows from the fact that you know you're speaking in a space outside of surveillance. And so it's not just like the kind of online world, but it's potentially like a parallel society, like a parallel financial infrastructure. Like what we're trying to do is like create a vision for anonymity and privacy that's no longer about hiding or shying away, but it's actually about expansive energy and like active energy and like, doing cool shit, rather than than hiding or and trying to conceal your preferences, but actually like what is the most transformative activity that I could possibly be engaged in? Something so transformative and emancipatory that it actually makes me a threat, that they want to start monitoring me and taking away my freedoms. Like that's where that's what we want to enable. We want to enable people to do that. Money that makes like transformative activity. So it's like, for us, if we were to create the tools for people to do that, and we're doing that, that's what we call the Dark Forest. But it's kind of it's probably a misappropriation of like the term. But Bogna, in her book, she calls me out when she kind of accuses me of being like this kind of revolutionary tendency. It's like she would see it as basically you're hiding some. You're creating a cope. You're inventing this like revolutionary kind of goal to distract yourself from the horror of existence. And like really what you should be doing, like the true art would be to this aesthetic sublimation where you like actually confront the bleakness of the situation and not try to invent like some like idealist or like Gnostic kind of like world beyond that you can run away to, So, but I do like her book, and I think she makes a fair point. And I think what our goal should be is like, what if you could try to combine both and create like a revolutionary sublimation, or like a praxis that's no longer, it's not about running away. It is about 100% kind of like accepting the state of affairs, and in an unflinching way, like without being in a state of fear, continuing to pursue like the highest ideal, which is like, like the pursuit of freedom and like, expansive activity and like breaking out of like whatever cage is set before you, like whether that be surveillance or something else. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was going to say she sounds like a Gnostic, maybe. A Gnostic Calvinist, maybe just to kind of get us into
Calvinist,
because that's what Nick Land calls himself, a Gnostic.
Yeah, she would. I mean, I think she would call me a Gnostic, but yeah, but okay. Yeah. But
Yeah,
Nickland.
yeah, maybe. Yeah, we're a few minutes left to talk
Yeah,
about.
let's talk about Nickland.
Sorry.
Oh, we're over time.
Oh, okay.
Oh, could we quick Nickland? Just really quick.
Ask us about Nickland afterwards.
Oh, no.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.